Welcome to CPI Webinar Shorts, where we look at the key issues surrounding schools, behaviour and education culture, and we discuss the challenges that you face. So let's dig into this one. What's positive about positive handling? The short answer is there's nothing positive about restraining a child for the child or the people doing it. Restraint might sometimes feel necessary. It might sometimes be lawful. It might even prevent immediate injury or harm. But the experience for the child is not a positive one. And if we label it as positive handling, there is a distinct danger of softening this reality. The language we use shapes scrutiny. If we soften the language, we soften the threshold. If we soften the threshold, we increase the chance of overuse, and we make it easier to minimize, under-record, or rationalize. So in this session, I'm going to call it what it is: restraint, or restrictive intervention. And I would suggest that if your school has a culture of minimizing restraint by calling it positive handling or similar, then this session is for you. A school culture that supports the management of the most distressed students brilliantly is the key to calm, predictable learning environments. This is the center of the whole conversation. The schools that manage the most distressed pupils brilliantly are the schools that rely on restraint the least. When pupils are dysregulated, many are not trying to win, they are testing safety. Will you reject me like everyone else? Will you escalate, shame, or punish me? Will you stay calm and predictable? Now let's link that back to language. If staff carry the phrase positive handling, it can quietly shift the mindset from this is a serious safeguarding last resort to this is a strategy we use when behaviour escalates. And once restraint becomes a strategy, it becomes much easier to justify, repeat, and normalise. So we keep the seriousness alive by naming the action to what it is: a restrictive intervention. When we take a 360-degree viewpoint, behaviour and culture sit out inside safeguarding. A safer child leads to better behaviour. When I talk about safety in schools, I'm really focusing on this idea of felt safety. So we've got emotional safety, which is about feeling secure, respected, not humiliated. And similarly, psychological safety, but that's about feeling able to speak, ask for help, disclose, make mistakes without fear. Then we have physical safety, which is about the environment, crisis response, first aid, protection from harm. And then finally, relational safety, which is more about trust, communication, resolution, and inclusivity. Restrictive intervention affects all three of these areas. Even when a staff feel calm and professional, the child may experience fear, shame, loss of control, or re-traumatization. So reduction isn't just about avoiding injury, it's about protecting dignity and voice. If we genuinely want fewer restrictive incidents, we don't start with the techniques. We need to start with environment, routines, relationships, reasonable adjustments, how adults respond under pressure. That's the culture work that can make restraints much rarer. And briefly, we should look at adverse childhood experiences and, more importantly, vulnerability. It's important to acknowledge the potential impact of our restrictive practice and how we can trigger and then re-traumatize a young person. This is not about excusing unsafe behaviour because of adverse experiences. It's about understanding what's driving the behaviours and being mindful that our actions affect other people's reactions. Some young people are living with chronic stress, trauma, neglect, instability, unmet SEND needs, or mental health challenges. And in those moments, behaviour can be communication. I can't cope. I don't feel safe. I need control. I'm overwhelmed. When we treat stress response like defiance, we escalate risk to re-traumatize. And when we respond with calm boundaries, co-regulation, planned adjustments, this is when we reduce the chance we ever reach restraint. So the most protective thing we can do is prevention, not just a nicer label for restraint. Let's be clear on restrictive practices. There are any actions that restrict a child or young person's movement, liberty, or access to spaces or people, whether that's physical holding, blocking, forced removal, or practices that effectively remove choice. So what are restrictive practices? Well, they can range from having a set timetable, one we would agree that mostly carries positive outcomes, Likewise, having sensible rules and policies, although could be described as restrictive in some ways, we tell young people what they can and can't do. When set up proportionately, few would argue that these don't help maintain an effective working culture. Then we have punishment and consequence. Here it's not about what you do, but the way that you do it that matters. And then as the type of restrictive practice increases, we have disengagements, breakaways, physical intervention, restraint, and then at the far end, seclusion. So why does language matter so much here? Well, because the more ordinary we make it sound, the more ordinary it can become. Does seclusion become isolation, become a name of a room when we really are aiming for opportunities to regulate? Every time, at least, a physical restraint happens, it should trigger safeguarding questions. Was there an imminent risk of harm? What was tried first? Was this proportionate and least intrusive? What reasonable adjustments were in place and were they used? What's going to change so it's less likely to happen next time? If the record says positive handling, it can accidentally slide past these questions. If the record says restraint or restrictive intervention, well, then it demands them. So what's positive about positive handling? Honestly, the phrase itself is the problem. Euphemisms can do three very harmful things. One, they reduce the perceived risk and seriousness. Two, they blur thresholds and make restraint feel like a normal behaviour tool. And three, they make it easier to minimise what happened when reporting to leaders, parents, governors, and external partners. If we want to reduce restrictive practice, we have to stop giving ourselves softer words, more palatable words. We can be compassionate without being vague. Call it restraint. Call it restrictive intervention. Then invest in the things that make it rarer. Prevention, planning, skill, data, oversight. If it's serious enough to do, I'd say it's serious enough to name. Barbara Kelly said, the practitioner is the intervention. Now, this isn't a slogan, it's a safeguarding truth. In moments of distress, the adult nervous system drives the room. A regulated adult can slow escalation. An escalated adult can accelerate it. And this is again where language shows up. If staff have internalized restraint as a positive handling experience, then the emotional weight can drop off. It's fine, it's part of what we do. If staff are required to name it as restraint, a safeguarding last resort, this reinforces the mindset. My job is to prevent this. And if it does happen, it must be reasonable, proportionate, brief, and accountable. So adult regulation, clear boundaries, high expectations, and dignity-based responses become your frontline prevention strategy. Of course, you could be strict without being unkind. Safeguarding is not softness, it's standards with dignity. The fastest route to escalation is shame. Public corrections, sarcasm, power struggles, threats, or making a child prove compliance. These approaches don't create safety or respect, they create fear and resistance. What works better is calm certainty, clear expectations, short neutral language, choices where possible, time and space to regulate, and reparation after the incident. When we lead with dignity, we reduce the moments where restraint even enters the conversation. So these 6 core strategies are how you make restraint rarer and how you can stop being hidden. Originally developed by Kevin Huckshorn with a view to reduce restraint and seclusion in mental health settings, I think we can take this model and apply the thinking to a school culture. 1, leadership and governance. Leaders and governors should ask not only was it justified, but was it preventable, and what changes now? Based on the data that's actually used, we should track frequency, duration, location, time of day, repetition of pupils, staff, triggers, patterns that we can identify that point to system fixes, not blame. Of course, we need to look at staff training, workforce capability, on de-escalation, co-regulation, lawful decision-making, high-quality recording. This shouldn't just be an annual update. This is about practice, coaching, and supervision on an onward basis. We also have prevention tools, things that we can put in place like risk assessments and reasonable adjustments that staff can actually use in the moment when it comes to their decision-making. Plans that live in a folder don't prevent incidents. Further training might be needed to build and use this developing toolkit. Of course, we need to have a debrief, reparation, pupil voice after an incident where we can restore relationships, we can learn the young person's perspective and therefore aim to reduce repeat events. And then finally at the bottom we've got family or service user involvements, but this is about alignment, transparency that builds trust, being able to describe incidents plainly, sharing learning and aligning plans with home and professionals. This becomes the unhideable system. Honest terminology, consistent recording, and disciplined review with a visible shared learning experience. So here are 3 actions that you could do next week. Number 1, audit your language. Look through your policies, your incident logs, your training slides, your staff conversations even, formal and informal. If you see positive handling, ask, what are we actually describing? Would a parent understand exactly what happened from that language or that record? Are we just making it more palatable to ourselves? And number 2, you standardize terminology. I would suggest using restraint, restrictive intervention with clear categories. Make the recording of prompts factual and child-centered. What risk was present? What strategies were attempted first? The duration of the intervention, who was present? What support followed? And number 3, publish learning internally. Not names, but the learning. What is changing to reduce reoccurrence? Think about the environment, timetable pinch points, staffing, planning, reasonable adjustments, and supervision. Reduction of restraint comes from visibility and learning, not just softer words. If you want fewer restrictive incidents, focus on culture and capability. A 360-degree approach to training should build prevention skills, confident de-escalation, decision-making, recording that stands up to scrutiny. The goal isn't about getting better at restraint. The goal is to make restraint rarer. And when that happens, to ensure it's safeguarding-led, proportionate and accountable. Like I said before, if it's serious enough to do, it's serious enough to name. So let's not make restraint sound nicer. Let's make it rarer. Thank you for staying with this topic. If you want to discuss how to audit language, strengthen governance oversight, or even build a reduction plan that holds up under safeguarding scrutiny, please do get in touch via the details on the screen. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you next time.